You think you're safe because you follow the rules. But what if the threat is the person standing next to you who decided to play a joke? Today, we reveal 6 strange deaths caused not by machine failure, but by human creativity. This is the dark side of society. Warning, these actions led to death. Never repeat them. The most dangerous element in a heavy industrial workshop is not the high-voltage equipment or the spinning saw blades. It is the corrosive power of boredom. It is late on a Friday afternoon in a vehicle repair center, the time of week when discipline relaxes and the strict rules of safety begin to blur. The air smells of old grease, ozone, and coffee. The heavy machinery is silent, but the minds of 3 mechanics are active, searching for entertainment to fill the last hour of the shift. They are not murderers. They are simply bored men who have lost their respect for the physics of their trade. Their eyes land on a discarded component in the corner, a replacement airbag module. To the average person, and unfortunately to these mechanics, the word bag implies softness. It implies a pillow. It implies a harmless cushion of air designed to gently catch a face during a car accident. This linguistic misunderstanding is the fatal flaw in their logic. They do not understand that they are holding a solid-state rocket booster. An airbag does not inflate with compressed air like a tire. It detonates using a chemical reaction. Inside the metal canister is a pellet of sodium azide, a volatile chemical that, when ignited, converts into nitrogen gas at supersonic speeds. It is a controlled bomb, but today, it is treated as a toy. The plan is constructed with the crude logic of a cartoon. They will place the explosive module under the seat of a rolling office chair, wire it to a car battery, and trigger it when their colleague sits down. The expectation is a comedic hop, a jump scare that will be laughed about for years. They spend 20 minutes rigging the trap. They slide the heavy steel canister between the base of the chair and the foam cushion, pointing the blast zone directly upward. They run the copper wires across the concrete floor, hiding them under rubber mats, leading back to a 12-volt battery behind a tool chest. The atmosphere is light, filled with suppressed giggles and the thrill of anticipation. They are setting up a murder weapon, but they believe they are setting up a prank. The victim enters the room. He is a man in his 30s, tired, his hands stained with oil, thinking only about the weekend and his family. He has no reason to inspect his chair. In his world, a chair is a static, safe object. He relies on the safety betrayal, the assumption that his environment is benign. He walks to his desk, holding a cup of coffee. The pranksters clutch the wire contacts, their hearts racing, waiting for the connection. The victim turns, adjusts the seat height, and sits down. His full body weight, 180 pounds, settles directly over the concealed charge. The foam cushion compresses, leaving less than an inch of material between his spine and the steel casing of the explosive. The circuit is closed. The reaction is instantaneous. There is no ramp-up, no warning hiss, and no time to react. In less than 30 milliseconds, twice as fast as the blink of a human eye, the solid fuel ignites. The chemical expansion generates a pressure wave of 2,000 pounds per square inch. This is not a push. It is a violent, percussive strike. The energy has nowhere to go but up. The laws of physics take over with brutal impartiality. The airbag expands at 200 miles per hour, hitting the base of the seat with the force of a sledgehammer swung by a giant. The chair does not just lift. It accelerates vertically with a G-force that the human skeleton was never designed to withstand. The mechanics of the injury are catastrophic and clinical. The force is transmitted directly through the pelvis and into the lumbar spine. This is known in trauma medicine as axial loading. The vertebrae are compressed between the upward force of the explosion and the downward inertia of the man's upper body. Under this impossible pressure, the spinal column undergoes a burst fracture. The bone does not simply break. It disintegrates, sending fragments into the spinal canal. Simultaneously, the shock wave travels through the soft tissue of the torso. The internal organs are subjected to a massive shearing force. The aorta, the main artery carrying blood from the heart, is compromised by the sudden displacement. The man does not fly into the air like a cartoon character. He crumples. The sound is not a funny pop, but a deafening, thunderous crack that shakes the windows of the office, followed by the sickening thud of the chair flipping over. The laughter in the room is cut short, replaced by a ringing silence and the smell of burnt chemical propellant. The victim lies on the floor, motionless. The prank has inflicted injuries comparable to falling from a 3-story building or being involved in a high-speed vehicle rollover. The pranksters rush forward, but the damage is already written in the biology of the victim. Emergency services arrive, but there is no reversing the laws of physics. The medical report is a laundry list of fatal trauma, severe spinal transaction, massive internal hemorrhaging, and blunt force trauma to the pelvis. A device engineered to save lives in a collision was repurposed into an instrument of death, all because 3 men mistook a chemical explosive for a whoopee cushion. The workshop remains silent, the twisted chair sitting in the corner as a permanent monument to the lethal cost of ignorance. The modern logistics warehouse is a vast landscape of concrete and steel, a place where the passage of time is measured not by clocks, but by the rhythmic hum of conveyor belts. It is an environment built for efficiency, designed to handle cold cargo, not the fragility of the human body. Yet, during the graveyard shift, the silence of the facility often invites a dangerous kind of boredom. In this specific warehouse, the centerpiece was the automated pallet wrapper, a heavy industrial turntable designed to spin 2-ton loads of merchandise. To the exhausted workers at 3 a.m., the machine looked less like a piece of lethal high-torque equipment and more like a playground ride sitting idle in the shipping bay. The idea was born from a lack of sleep and a surplus of curiosity. They would use the machine to spin a colleague until he was too dizzy to stand. It was intended to be a harmless physical prank, a moment of slapstick comedy. The victim, a young man known for his energy, volunteered. He climbed onto the steel disc, sitting cross-legged near the edge, gripping the wooden slats of a pallet for stability. He gave a thumbs up to his friend at the control panel, a gesture of confidence that would soon become a tragic final memory. The operator hit the green start button. At first, the rotation was slow, a gentle 12 revolutions per minute. The victim laughed, leaning back against the pull, enjoying the artificial gravity. But this machine was not a carnival ride with safety governors. It was an industrial beast powered by a 3-phase electric motor. The operator, caught up in the spectacle and encouraged by the victim's shouts, made a fatal calculation. He wanted to increase the fun, so he turned the speed dial to its maximum setting and engaged turbo mode. The rotation speed tripled. The machine whirred into a high-pitched drone, blurring the victim into a streak of color. This is the moment the prank crossed the invisible line into a lethal physics experiment. The laws of motion are absolute. As the speed increased, the G-force acting on the victim's body grew exponentially. Because he was sitting with his head positioned toward the outer rim of the spinning disc, the physics created a condition known in aviation medicine as a readout. The centrifugal force acted like a giant, invisible hand, driving the blood from his legs and torso directly toward his head. The human circulatory system is a hydraulic network designed to function at 1 G. It cannot withstand the pressure of 5 Gs, forcing fluid into the skull. Inside the victim's head, the pressure skyrocketed. He stopped laughing. He tried to scream, "Stop!" but the force compressed his chest wall, making it impossible to inhale. The operator, standing safely at the console, saw only the blur of motion and assumed the silence was part of the game. He did not realize he was witnessing a biological catastrophe. Deep within the victim's cranium, the vascular walls were pushed beyond their structural limits. Multiple blood vessels ruptured simultaneously. This is clinically described as a massive acute intracranial hemorrhage. It was not a lingering death. It was a system reset. The brain was flooded with fluid, instantly compressing the brainstem, the command center that controls breathing and the heartbeat. Consciousness was extinguished in a fraction of a second. The man was dead before the machine even slowed down. To the operator, the scene still looked like a joke. He finally hit the red stop button, expecting his friend to stumble off and vomit. The turntable slowed to a halt, but the silence that returned was heavy and absolute. The victim did not move. He sat frozen in the position he had assumed minutes earlier, slumped against the boxes, but the spark of life was gone. His eyes were open but unseeing. When paramedics arrived, they found a scene that defied visual logic. There was no external trauma, no broken bones, no blood on the floor. The killer was invisible. It was pure physics, a silent force that had squeezed the life out of him without ever touching him. The autopsy confirmed that sheer G-force caused a stroke so massive it was incompatible with life. The prank mimicked a childhood game but utilized a machine with the power of a centrifuge, turning a moment of friendship into a brutal lesson on the fragility of human biology against the unyielding laws of inertia. The operator was left staring at a machine that had done exactly what he told it to do, unable to comprehend that his finger on a button had been as lethal as a loaded gun. The skeletal frame of a house under construction is a deceptive environment. It is an open-air cage of raw timber and concrete, where the air smells of pine sawdust, curing cement, and sweat. In this zone, the rhythm of labor is set by the percussive thud of hammers and the hiss of air compressors, a soundscape of industry that masks the inherent danger of the tools involved. Complacency is the silent killer on a job site. After thousands of repetitions, a worker begins to view a lethal instrument as merely an extension of their hand. This was the psychological trap that snapped shut on a sweltering afternoon in California, blurring the line between professional construction and juvenile horseplay. The victim was 28-year-old Isidro Zapata, a framer working alongside a crew he considered friends. The instrument of the tragedy was a pneumatic framing nailer, a heavy-duty tool designed to drive 3-inch steel fasteners into solid lumber using compressed air at 120 pounds per square inch. To a carpenter, it is a tool. To the laws of physics, it is a low-velocity firearm. The tragedy began with a moment of idle boredom and a terrible idea: a mock duel. Zapata's co-worker decided to break the monotony by playing cowboy, mimicking the gunfighters of old westerns. He raised the nail gun, aiming it across the room at Isidro, but the prankster believed he was safe. He operated under a false sense of security, born of a fundamental misunderstanding of the tool's mechanics and ballistics. A pneumatic nailer features a primary safety mechanism, a spring-loaded contact tip at the nose that prevents the gun from firing unless it is pressed firmly against a surface. It is a fail-safe designed specifically to prevent airborne discharges. However, the human desire for a joke often overrides engineering safeguards. To make the gun fire in the air for dramatic effect, the co-worker used his free hand to manually pull back the safety spring, bypassing the mechanism entirely. He held two fatal misconceptions. First, that his aim was wide enough to miss, and second, that a nail fired through the air would lose velocity so quickly it would bounce off a human like a tossed pebble. He was wrong on both counts. He leveled the tool. The distance was short, perhaps 10 or 15 feet. He squeezed the trigger. The compressor engaged. The internal piston slammed forward with the force of a sledgehammer. A 3-inch galvanized steel nail was expelled from the barrel at a velocity exceeding 400 feet per second. It was not a pebble, it was a stabilized steel dart, carrying significant kinetic energy. At close range, the aerodynamics of a nail are surprisingly efficient. It did not tumble, it flew true. The distance between the two men was crossed in less than a blink of an eye. Too fast for a human reflex to dodge, too fast for the brain to process the threat. The nail struck Zapata in the center of the chest. The entry wound was small, almost a puncture, betraying the catastrophic damage occurring inside. The steel projectile passed between the ribs, bypassing the sternum, and pierced the pericardium, the tough sac surrounding the heart. It continued its trajectory, penetrating the wall of the right ventricle. In clinical terms, This is a penetrating cardiac injury leading to immediate cardiac tamponade. The heart, a muscular pump operating under high pressure, was compromised instantly. Blood began to fill the pericardial sac, compressing the heart from the outside and preventing it from beating. There was no Hollywood-style splash of blood. The bleeding was internal, rapid, and fatal. Zapata did not fall immediately. He stood for a frozen second, perhaps looking confused, his brain trying to reconcile the sensation of impact with the context of a joke. But his circulation was collapsing. The supply of oxygenated blood to his brain ceased. He crumpled onto the plywood subfloor. The laughter of the crew, the yee-haw of the mock duel, was instantly strangled by the heavy thud of his body. The coworker dropped the tool, the realization crashing down on him with the weight of a collapsing wall. He ran to his friend, but there is no field medicine for a nail in the heart on a remote construction site. Emergency services were summoned, sirens wailing in the distance, but the physics of the event were irreversible. The nail had done exactly what it was designed to do: drive deep into the material it struck. The tragedy lies in the absolute disconnect between the intent and the outcome. The prankster intended to make a noise. He ended up stopping a heart. The legal system would later grapple with the definitions of manslaughter and negligence, but the reality was simpler and colder. A man died because his friend treated a lethal industrial weapon with the casual disregard of a child playing with a toy, failing to respect that the laws of ballistics do not recognize the difference between a beam of wood and a human chest. The industrial bakery is a world of sensory comfort, a warm, humid environment that smells of rising yeast, caramelized sugar, and vanilla. It is a place associated with sustenance and life, a factory of morning rituals, not a landscape of danger. The night shift is a rhythmic, almost hypnotic experience, defined by the clattering of massive steel mixers and the hum of conveyor belts carrying thousands of loaves into the ovens. In this specific facility, the atmosphere was lighthearted. The workers were a close-knit team who used humor to combat the heavy fatigue of a 3 a.m. schedule. But comfort breeds complacency, and in an environment filled with raw materials, even the most benign substance can be weaponized by ignorance. The victim was a 34-year-old confectioner, a woman known for her focus and skill, standing by a stainless steel prep table finishing a batch of dough. The threat hanging over her was not a sharp blade or a hot oven, but a simple, open sack of extra fine pastry flour. To a baker, flour is as harmless as water. It is the fundamental atom of their universe. But to a pulmonologist, flour is particulate matter, millions of microscopic solid particles that, when suspended in the air in high density, create a suffocating atmosphere incompatible with human life. The prank was conceived as a classic piece of slapstick comedy, a ghost gag intended to leave the victim covered in white powder, looking like a cartoon character. The colleague, a young man who viewed the bakery as a playground rather than a factory, crept up behind her. He held a large container filled with several pounds of the high-grade, powdery flour. His plan was simple: dump it over her head, creating a messy, funny moment that would result in nothing more than a cleaning bill and some laughter. He did not understand the physiology of the startle reflex. When a human being is surprised, the brain's immediate autonomic response is to gasp, a sharp, deep inhalation to oxygenate the blood for a fight-or-flight response. This biological imperative was the trigger for the tragedy. The prankster upended the container. A dense, white avalanche cascaded down, instantly enveloping the woman's head and upper body. The air around her face was replaced by a thick, opaque suspension of dust. At that exact microsecond, terrified by the sudden impact, she gasped. She did not inhale air. She inhaled a concentrated solid. The physics of the event shifted from a prank to a medical emergency in the span of a single breath. The flour, traveling at the speed of a sharp inhalation, bypassed the natural filtration of the nose and coated the back of the throat, the trachea, and the bronchial tubes. This is where the chemistry of the substance turned lethal. Flour is hydrophilic. It loves water. Upon contact with the moist mucous membranes of the respiratory tract, the dry powder instantly absorbed the moisture, turning into a thick, glutinous paste. It was no longer dust. It was a biological cement. The reaction was catastrophic. The victim's airway was effectively plastered shut from the inside. She began to claw at her throat, her eyes wide with panic, but she could not cough. To cough, one must first inhale air to create pressure, but her intake valves were sealed by the dough-like substance coating her windpipe. This condition is known as acute airway obstruction via particulate aspiration. It is a form of dry drowning. The colleague's laughter died instantly as he realized she wasn't sneezing or sputtering. She was fighting for her life. The cloud of white dust slowly settled around her like snow, creating a serene visual contrast to the violent struggle occurring inside her chest. The other workers rushed over, thinking she was having an asthma attack. They tried the Heimlich maneuver, but the blockage was not a solid object like a piece of food that could be dislodged. It was a coating that lined the walls of her lungs. The oxygen levels in her blood plummeted. Her face, dusted white like a ghost, turned cyanotic as the lack of oxygen turned her skin blue. The panic in the room was absolute as they realized the harmless ingredient was killing her. By the time emergency services arrived, the hypoxia had caused cardiac arrest. The paramedics attempted to intubate, but the paste in her throat made the procedure nearly impossible. The medical report would later describe the cause of death as mechanical asphyxia due to massive aspiration of foreign material. A woman had drowned in a room with no water, killed by the very substance she used to create food, all because a coworker failed to realize that the human lung is a delicate vacuum, and filling that vacuum with dust is a sentence of death. The bakery, usually a place of warmth, was left cold and silent, the white powder on the floor serving as the outline of a tragedy born from a fatal misunderstanding of biology. The modern high bay warehouse is a cathedral of vertical space, a silent grid of steel racking that rises 30 feet into the dusty air, designed to maximize every cubic inch of storage. In this environment, the floor is the zone of human activity, but the air belongs to the machines. It is a binary world. You are either safely grounded or you are suspended by hydraulics. On a stifling Tuesday afternoon, this clear distinction was blurred by a moment of fatigue and a fatal lapse in judgment. The victim was a 24-year-old logistics worker, exhausted from a double shift, who committed a common but dangerous violation. He sought a place to rest within the operational zone. He found a secluded corner behind a stack of crates, curled up on an empty wooden pallet, and fell into a deep, heavy sleep. To a tired mind, the pallet was a bed. To the warehouse environment, it was a piece of cargo waiting to be moved. The tragedy was set in motion by a forklift operator who spotted the sleeping man. Instead of waking him with a shout or a horn, the operator's mind drifted toward comedy. He conceived a prank that is legendary in warehouse folklore, a classic gag intended to disorient and confuse. Lift the sleeper high into the air so that he wakes up floating. The logic was juvenile. He will wake up, see the ceiling, be confused, and we will all laugh. The operator drove his machine, a 3-ton electric counterbalance forklift, quietly toward the pallet. He slid the steel tines into the slots with practiced precision, careful not to jostle the sleeper. He engaged the hydraulic lift. The mast extended smoothly. The electric motor hummed a low frequency that did not disturb the victim's exhaustion. Slowly, foot by foot, the wooden platform ascended. It passed the first rack level, then the second. The operator stopped the lift at a height of approximately 13 feet, 4 meters above the unforgiving concrete slab. He turned off the engine and waited, suppressing a chuckle. watching his friend suspended in the void like a magic trick. This was the moment where the prankster assumed total control over the victim's reaction. He failed to account for human physiology. When a person wakes up, the brain requires a split second to recalibrate its proprioception, the sense of body position in space. Usually the brain expects the stability of a bed or a floor. The victim began to stir. The operator whistled sharply to rouse him. The victim's eyes snapped open. His vestibular system, the inner ear mechanism that controls balance, immediately signaled a catastrophic mismatch. He was not on the ground. He was floating. He looked over the edge and saw the concrete floor far below. The reaction was not confusion, it was primal, animalistic terror. The brain triggered the Moro reflex, a violent startle response where the limbs flail outward to grab onto safety. This sudden jerky movement was fatal. A wooden pallet is not a solid platform. It is a loose structure resting on two narrow steel forks. It has no railings, no bolts, no stability. The victim's violent thrashing shifted his center of gravity abruptly to the left. The pallet tipped. The wood groaned as it slid off the smooth steel tines. There was no time to grab a rack, no time to scream. Gravity took hold instantly. The fall took less than 1 second. The victim plummeted 13 feet, rotating slightly in the air. He did not land on his feet. He struck the concrete floor head first. The sound of the impact was a sickening, sharp crack that echoed through the quiet aisles, instantly erasing the operator's smile. The physics of the landing were devastating. The kinetic energy of a 160-pound body falling from that height is immense. Upon impact, the force was concentrated entirely on the cranium and the cervical spine. The vertebrae of the neck, the atlas and the axis, were subjected to a compression load they could not withstand. They shattered instantly. The spinal cord was severed. It was a clean death in the clinical sense. The lights went out before the pain signals could even reach the brain. The operator lowered the forks in a panic, jumping out of the cab to help, but he was greeting a corpse. The warehouse, designed to store goods, had become a tomb. The prank relied on the victim waking up calmly, a rational expectation for a rational situation. But by introducing height and fear, the operator triggered a survival instinct that, ironically, led directly to death. A young man died not because of a mechanical failure, but because his friend treated a 4-meter drop like a harmless visual gag, forgetting that gravity is the one law in the warehouse that can never be suspended. The operating cabin of a tower crane is a transparent box suspended hundreds of feet above the earth, a solitary workspace that offers a panoramic view of the skyline but isolates the worker in a thermal prison. On a construction site during a record-breaking summer heat wave, this cabin functions effectively as a greenhouse. The sun beats down on the reinforced glass from all angles, trapping infrared radiation and raising the internal temperature to levels that test the physiological limits of human endurance. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the ambient temperature outside was pushing past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside the sealed, non-ventilated cabin, it was a stifling oven. The operator, a veteran of the job known for his reliability, had descended the long ladder for his 30-minute lunch break, leaving the machine baking in the merciless sun. His colleagues, a ground crew who respected him, noticed his extreme exhaustion. They saw his sweat-soaked shirt and his flushed face, and they decided to perform an act of kindness. This was not a malicious prank intended to humiliate. It was a benevolent surprise intended to provide relief from the brutal conditions. They had access to a shipping container used for curing concrete additives, which was kept cool using blocks of industrial dry ice. They retrieved a 5-gallon bucket, filled it to the brim with the smoking white chunks, and one of them climbed the tower ladder, carrying the heavy load. He placed the bucket on the floor of the crane cabin, right beside the operator's seat. Their logic was simple and domestic. Ice is cold, therefore ice will cool the room. They expected him to return to a frosty, refreshing oasis. They did not understand basic chemistry. Dry ice is not frozen water. It is solid carbon dioxide, CO2. Unlike water ice, which melts into a liquid, dry ice sublimates. This means it transitions directly from a solid state to a gas, expanding in volume by a factor of nearly 800 to 1. By placing that bucket in the small, hermetically sealed cabin, they had inadvertently constructed a lethal atmospheric trap. The operator climbed back up the tower, exhausted but ready to finish his shift. He opened the door and was immediately hit by a wave of cool air. He smiled, seeing the bucket and the white mist curling over the floor, assuming it was just a makeshift air conditioner. He sat down, grateful for the thoughtfulness of his friends, and closed the heavy, soundproof door. The seal was airtight. The trap was set. As the dry ice continued to sublimate in the heat, it pumped cubic feet of pure carbon dioxide into the tiny volume of the cabin. Carbon dioxide is heavier than oxygen. It did not circulate. It filled the room from the bottom up, like invisible water filling a tank. The operator sat in his chair, effectively submerged in a rising tide of colorless, odorless gas. The tragedy of CO2 asphyxiation is its stealth. Unlike holding one's breath or choking, which triggers panic due to the painful buildup of waste gases, breathing in an atmosphere of pure CO2 can sometimes induce a state of narcosis before the panic sets in. The operator began to feel heavy. He attributed this to the post-lunch dip and the sudden relief from the heat. He leaned back in his chair, watching the load block sway gently in the wind. His blood chemistry was shifting rapidly. The hemoglobin in his bloodstream, starved of oxygen, could no longer sustain brain function. This is known as hypercapnia, followed by severe hypoxia. His vision blurred at the edges. He felt a wave of dizziness, similar to extreme intoxication. He did not claw at his throat. He simply slumped forward. The gas rose past his waist, then his chest, and finally enveloped his head. The brain, deprived of its essential fuel, shut down the conscious mind to preserve energy. He fell into a deep coma within minutes. The ground crew radioed him to move a load. There was no answer. They radioed again, joking that he must be enjoying the AC too much. Silence. Assuming his radio batteries had died, the foreman climbed the tower to check on him. When he peered through the glass, he saw the operator slumped over the controls, looking peacefully asleep in the cool mist that covered the floor. The foreman opened the door, and the invisible killer spilled out into the open air. Emergency resuscitation was attempted immediately, but the biological damage was irreversible. The cells of the cerebral cortex had died from oxygen starvation. The police report and the coroner's inquest told a tragic story of scientific ignorance. The operator had not died from the heat, nor from a heart attack. He had been chemically suffocated by a gift. The dry ice had evaporated completely by the time the investigation began, leaving no trace of the weapon, only a cool, silent cabin, and a man who paid the ultimate price for his colleagues' failure to understand that in a sealed space, even the air you breathe can be replaced by a silent executioner. The victims are gone, but the pranksters are still here, living in a prison of their own memory. Subscribe now if you want the truth. Now judge them in the comments. If your best friend accidentally killed you with a prank, would you want them charged with manslaughter, or is living with the guilt punishment enough? Be honest. Would you forgive your killer? Write your verdict.